This is Red Cap Conversations, the second episode.
Stay tuned for an honest and straightforward conversation. Please engage in dialogue respectfully. If you can't digest diverse perspectives in a healthy and honorable fashion, this podcast will not sit well with you. Proceed accordingly.
Yeah! Let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Red Cap Conversations. My name is Joshua Logan. On this episode, I just want to get something off my chest, set the record straight, so to be. If you listen to my first episode, you will have heard a lot about can't we all just get along type thinking. And I don't want anybody to get the misconception that I have some kumbaya, pie in the sky perception of the world. For the most part, what I was talking about in that episode is how to dialogue with people that you disagree with. It's not by shutting them out. It's not by shutting them down. It's not by getting them canceled or calling them names even. It's not about being hateful towards one another is the basic bottom line of what I was trying to say. To be a mature, to be responsible, to be a kind, to be a conscientious person that has something good to stand up for in this world, you're going to come across individuals that are just as passionate as you are, that have exactly the opposite perspective. And if you really want to be on the good side of things, you need to be able to talk to those folks in a good way. And I might have one or two people that might accidentally flip onto this podcast or the audio version that's up on YouTube right now, and they might disagree with a bunch of stuff that I'm saying. But I'm hoping that along the line somewhere, we could at least come to find this one solid piece of common ground, and that we respectfully dialogue with one another, that we keep the peace in our neighborhoods, in our nation. We don't want to be taking up arms physically or culturally. It's not just about physical warfare. When you break down the emotional and social relationships that you have with your neighbors, that's a type of warfare too that's just as destructive. Maybe not just as destructive, but it's a bad place. It's an ugly place. It's not somewhere that we should ever want to go. And talking to my Christian brothers and sisters, I guess, and those they would say are on the right. I mean, there is a right, there is a left, there is a difference, but we have so much in common with our neighbors that other people might consider as are on the left. We need to realize we can work together on some things and not be filled with hatred towards one another. But we do need to disagree. Otherwise, we're not being principled in what we're saying. We're not being principled in what we're doing. If I'm just bowing down every time you want me to, who am I? I got nothing. I got no courage. I got no backbone. I'm nobody's ally. And I'm not willing to do that. And you know what? Even if you are on the opposite side of the aisle from me, I'm not going to respect you if all you do is bow down every time there's some sort of controversy. I respect people that are honest, that stand up for what they believe is true, and that are straightforward in what they say. Whether they agree with me or not, I can respect that. I do not respect hypocrisy. I do not respect, name-calling nonsense. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a good joke's always a good joke, and people should be able to tease one another here and there. And I'm not talking about that and getting your feelings hurt just because somebody looks at you sideways. I'm talking about creating real divisions, being really hateful, pretending that someone else doesn't even have the right to speak in your presence. That's garbage. And that's a type of garbage that's getting more and more popular in our cultural surroundings. And I'm here to take a stand against that. Whether anybody ends up agreeing with me at the end of the day or not, that's not what I'm about. I say what I believe to be true. So of course I would like it to spread. I would like to see everybody standing on a firmer foundation, being more prosperous. And in order to do that, you have to stand with what is right and good and true. because ultimately those are the things that prosper in the long run. Wickedness, corruption, lies, those things will give you short-term victories. No doubt they will. They make you feel good. Of course, that's the way evil works. It makes you feel good in the moment. It gives you a victory, just short-lived. But when you do the right thing, when you do the true thing, sometimes it hurts right in the onset. And sometimes it's painful. But in the long run, it's victory, it's peace, it's prosperity, it's goodness. And those are the things I stand for. If you listen to my first podcast or YouTube video or whatever you might want to call it, you'll have heard that I stand for the name of Jesus Christ. But I also want to stand with my neighbors that have other things that we agree upon, especially culturally and politically. When we're talking spiritual aspects and spiritual truths, I'm always going to stand on the Word of God. I'm always going to stand up for the Bible. I'm always going to tell you that it's true, 100%. And I know there's so many people out there that disagree with that. And I just want to say to those folks, that doesn't mean we have to be enemies when it comes to other matters that arise in our day-to-day lives. We can stand strong on cultural issues together. We can stand strong on political issues together, because if we're able to allow ourselves to be divided by the simple fact that we disagree on that matter, the authoritarian, corrupt regime at the top of everything wins. And that's not what I want to see. What I want to see is the common man prosper, the grassroots organizations, the local communities. That's where I want to see prosperity and strength. And even if it's a local community that doesn't agree with me on the spiritual side of things, I still want to see them do good, except for, of course, when that means causing harm. Again, I talked a lot about the LGBTQ situation in my first podcast. I mean, I guess if you haven't listened to it and you want to have some more context to what I'm saying, I would suggest you do that or skip it, whatnot. But anyway, what I talked about was respecting the personal choice of others. If an adult lives the lifestyle they live, so be it. I respect your right to make that choice and live that life. But this cultural phenomenon that exists in our nation and in our culture more broadly and in all of our communities is not just about accepting what other people choose to do with their time. They're really pushing hard to corrupt children, and to the level that they're willing to hide things from parents. They're willing to inject chemicals into these children. They're willing to do surgeries on teenagers, and they drop them as soon as things start to go sideways. They don't really explain the entire story as to, who they are as an individual, because we have this culture within our society that has developed that punishes anybody that seeks to have that discussion with an individual that wants to be, I guess what they would say, questioning. Doctors, psychologists, educators, even if they're not really on board with this philosophy, they're scared to have that conversation with the individual to say, hey, you feel like a girl on the inside and you're really a boy on the outside. There might be something else going on here. They're not willing to have that discussion because they're afraid of the mob is all you can call it. I don't want to get derogatory, but there's just this group out there that wants to shout and scream and just break anything that doesn't align with them. And I guess, there probably are people I don't see it honestly in the culture around me, but I guess if you look at history or something else, there are people that would, agree with me on factual matters like my stance on the Bible, my stance on cultural issues that are just as emotional and destructive, in that they would want to shut down people that disagree with them. I guess that's what you would truly call the far right. It's such a hard word to use because it's thrown around so loosely by so many cultural commentators. Again, most of our politicians these days are cultural commentators. They're not leaders. We don't see our real leaders, and that's a problem. They're hiding like cowards behind the facades that they create. And I guess, I don't know how you can live like that, hiding behind a facade as a little coward making moves out in the world while you cower away somewhere with your face hidden behind someone else's face. I mean, that's obviously what's happening with Joe Biden. The guy can hardly get through a speech. He's obviously not the president of the United States. And I don't know what kind of coward you are hiding behind an old man, but just step out and, declare yourself as a presidential nominee if you really want to run things, but they won't because they want to shroud their perspectives in deception, and they want to hide behind other faces because they want to trick folks. And, that's where Donald Trump gets the most solid support from real grassroots people, is because he doesn't hide anything behind a facade. He just says what he thinks. And I guess a lot of people hate that too, but that's honestly what, like I said, that's what I respect in an individual. So that's why I have respect for that man as a leader. I do think he's a leader because he's honest in his cultural perspectives, and people have come to trust that. But again, you look at others, they're supposedly leaders, they're just cultural commentators. Justin Trudeau, for instance, probably couldn't lead his way out of a paper bag. He seems to believe a lot of the things he says, but it's obvious he's being led around by the nose by international powers and special interest groups here in Canada that are attached to international entities. It's just obvious. I mean, even if you go and look at the economic realities of his administration, it's factually true. He pays out so many dollars, our dollars or printed dollars, to these, consulting companies, he calls them, or whatnot. And they tell him how to run his government. Anyways, that was a bit of a sidetrack, but just getting back to my main point here is that I talked a lot about dialoguing with people that we disagree with in a respectful and kind manner. That's the only way to do it. Honestly, if you want to be any man of integrity, that is the way you do it. You don't come and stab somebody because they're not saying what you want them to say. You don't mob up on them or get them canceled. That's the action of a coward. That's the garbage action that we see prevalent. If you look at our boys from Save Canada, all they're doing is talking to people, and you got these mobs of individuals coming to shut them down, tell them they can't speak. We have cowardly police officers standing on that side of the line, hauling them off to jail cells just to release them later, and basically shutting down their right to speak. I would never do that. I would never encourage that. I don't care what you're preaching. I'm going to say that you have a right to say what's on your mind. And I'm going to say that anybody with integrity is going to let you to say what you need to say. So, but that would lead one to believe that, I think that we can all just have complete agreement on everything and that there's not going to be division. That couldn't be farther from the truth. While we need to be kind and conscientious neighbors in terms of how we interact with those that we disagree with, at the same time, we need to understand that there are sides to this thing. There is a real conflict. There is a real culture war. We don't have to call it that, but it's the reality. There are people that want to see this atmosphere of seclusion and anger and bigotry that's developing. They want to see it continue to prosper to where if my opinion is not the one that's culturally and politically acceptable, then I'm not allowed to have that opinion. Maybe if I just do it quietly in my own basement at home, it might be acceptable. But don't you dare come out in public and talk about it. Don't you run for office and talk about the things that you believe in the bottom of your heart. Don't you go to school and live out and speak your perspectives in the classroom. Don't you dare do those things. They want you shut down, isolated, and kicked out of the room. All this time they're talking about inclusion and respect and all these nice words while they're putting people in a headlock and telling them to get out. Oh, that's not happening. It's absolutely happening. If you just listen for a minute and look around you, there's only accepted perspectives are being permitted, and they're enforcing that as far as they can, wherever they can. But it's mainly and sadly so strong throughout our institutions here in Canada. We got the Prime Minister passing online censorship bills, the Online News Act, you'd call it, the online censorship. They're giving government power to get their fingers into every little form of communication that exists. Right now, though, we need to learn how to step beyond that and get back to having local congregations that are real and sincere. So again, you have to take sides. Like, we're talking about being kind and good and conscientious to individuals that we disagree with, but at the same time, there's no such thing as a fence sitter, okay? There isn't. There are jerseys, there are two teams. There is an opposition and there is a defense. This is a real war. And it's not physical in our country at the moment, and God only knows if that'll persist the way things are going, but I hope it does, obviously. At the root of it, of course, there's a spiritual war that's at play, and that's the real root, and that's the real backdrop to all of these conversations. But that spiritual war manifests itself politically and culturally, and we need to engage on those fronts as well. We need to stand up for the truth. We need to stand up for what's right in every single arena. And I'm telling you right now, you have to pick a side. And you might be listening to me and you might agree with some things I say and not agree with other things that I say, but there's definitely a dividing line here. And the more you dig into cultural issues, the more you pay attention to what's going on around us in our political arena, in our institutions, our schools, throughout the media, you'll understand there is a dividing line. And it can get convoluted. It can get complicated because there's people that claim to stand on one side of the fence, but really their actions are devoted to something else entirely. Now, let's look at the conservative political establishment in Canada and in the United States as an example of how this can get diluted. There are sides, right? There is a good, there is a wrong, there's a right, and there's an evil. There's a righteousness and there's a wickedness. Now, you have to understand that first off before you start to decide which side you think is on the good side. But there is a good guy and there is a bad guy, 100%. And we could come up with some examples to prove that straight out, but take my word for that for a moment. And when I'm saying you got to pick a side and it can get complicated, look at this, okay? We got the Republicans in the United States of America. We have what they call the conservatives in Canada. And at the top end of it, there's a group that a lot of us would consider the establishment. They have the power. They have the resources. They influence the institutions. And at the bottom end of things, you have what are called the grassroots, right? The guys, the local guys, just like me, real people that are living their lives. They don't really have big levers to pull, but they want to take a stand in terms of speaking forth those things they seek, those things they see to be true and accurate and good. At the bottom, at the end of the day, we want to build strong homes, strong families, and strong communities. That's the passion that's in our heart because, that's what's been given to us. That's what's in our hands, and it depends, that's what we want to do with the opportunities that we have. We want to use them for good. But in order to do that, we need to cooperate with a larger society that's around us. And we see this larger society that's around us going crooked, going sideways, flipping on the things that we see as foundational to the strong home, the strong family, the strong community that we want to build. And we're saying, whoa, hold up. Y'all are turning the game upside down and you're breaking us. We can't afford to live like we want to. We can't afford to live like we should be able to because we're rich and abundant in resources here. And I'm not even talking about getting all crazy, raping the land or any goofy and stuff like that. I'm talking about using it responsibly. We have more than enough, especially in Canada. We only have 30 million people in this massive country with a huge amount of resources, and we're struggling to buy homes. Are you kidding me? We're struggling to build homes. Are you joking me? We're struggling with our food prices. That's ridiculous, man. We have modern food production capacities that are amazing, that are really, if you look at the history of humanity, miraculous. It's the way we can develop food, the energy we have to produce it and transport it. Excuse me, the building strategies and materials that we have at our disposal, and we really can't afford to build a home. We really can't afford to buy a house for a family. Are you kidding me? And that's the reality for more and more Canadians, because the people that are pulling the levers at the top end of things are crooked, corrupt, and backward. I'm not saying all of them are, because we can't go down that road either. I might win a bunch of people over with that simple observation there that the people at the top are screwing things up. But too many of us just get stuck right there, and we just sit down and say, wow, there's nothing we can do about it. Might as well not even vote. Might as well not even pay attention to politics. Yo, you're handing them the victory. We do have people in the houses of government that would be willing to do the right thing if we could stand up and support the right names, support the right movers, the right shakers. And if there are none there, we replace them. Right? We change the game. We don't just sit down and count ourselves out and say, oh, I guess we lost. That's not how the great victories of history were won. And yes, there were great victories throughout history. And yes, a lot of them did happen on this soil in North America. I know some tragedies took place as well. And that's been gone over, and we can go over that, but it's not as if it's hidden. But there's also some major victories that aren't being paid attention to. The rights and freedoms that we have, or that we feel we have, I don't think we really securely have them in Canada, but we feel we do because of what happened with the United States of America. The real rights and freedoms that are enshrined in law down there, we kind of feel that connection here in Canada because we have that cultural connection with the United States. But it really seems like with our court system and the way our laws are written up here, we really don't have any legal protections if the governments and the courts want to mess us over. I mean, not even just the courts. If the government wants to steamroll over any rights and freedoms they claim to give us, it seems like they can do that without batting an eye. And that's sad. But guess what? We can change that, man. If we stand up for what's right, if we speak up for what's right, and even if at the end of the day that doesn't change, we still need to live our lives in such a way that we're willing partners at the table. This thing's not going to fail because I didn't do my part. You see what I'm saying? I did my part. And that's the way I want my story to be. I don't care how crooked this society goes. I don't care if it continues to say 0 views and 0 likes. I don't care if nobody listens to me. I do care about the fact that I stood up and I said what was right. I stood in what I saw to be the exact right position. I'm going to stand before God one day, and so are you. And I'm preparing for that now. I'm talking to him now. I'm looking to listen to him now. I want his correction now. And I want to be his representative now. Not once I'm dead. That's the way it rolls in today's culture. The only time you ever step foot in church, you know somebody. Let's just be real for a second. You know somebody their whole life, right? And then you know everything about them. And then you go to their funeral, and you got the preacher up there saying all kinds of this and that and whatever is about Christianity that this person supposedly believed and they're confessed about God. And you're like, no, what? That wasn't involved in that person's life at all. But they're scared to be real with it. And I guess, funerals can be a sensitive topic, but we don't want to lie to anybody or sell them a bill of goods at any point. What I'm saying is, don't wait until you're sitting in the casket before you decide to pay attention to the afterlife. And there is one. You know what I'm saying? And it's not all roses on the other side, depending on where you stand with the creator of all creation. And he wants to bless everybody. He wants to give everybody a good everlasting. But the reality is not everybody's going to choose that. But again, let's get back to this main central point here. Let me take it back. So when we're talking to people we disagree with, we want to be kind, respectful, never shutting things down. Once you see somebody shutting down the other side, you automatic cowards, right? Automatic fools, no matter what. Even if they're preaching the Bible and they're saying so-and-so doesn't have a right to preach Islam, so-and-so doesn't have a right to speak their language, cowards, right? I'm preaching the Bible, and I'll tell you where we disagree. But at the same time, I'm always going to respect you as a person, that you do you, right? And I'm going to stand up for your right to do that always. Especially look at this Palestine thing. I don't agree with Hamas at all. I could go down a whole row of reasons, but let's just say I don't agree with how they're moving, right? But they can go out in the streets and they can make their point and they can say their piece. And I'm not going to say anybody should be shutting it down or calling the military or any of that. They can say their piece because I respect them as individuals. They have a right to say their piece. Now, once you start breaking things, once you start smashing stuff, once you start stealing or stabbing or killing, that's a different story. That's when the heavy boots got to come down. That's the only way we can protect our peace in this country is by having those heavy boots come down at the right time. And I'm not talking about when somebody's putting on a bouncy castle and handing out pancakes, Mr. Trudeau. That's not the time to stomp them with a horse. But, I digress. Moving forward. So you got to choose a side. But it can get complicated, right? Let's get back to that for a sec here. And I know I'm reiterating my points here, but I'm trying to have I'm trying to give you a large view of my perspective on these matters. I want you to know where I stand. So as I go forth and developing more of these episodes and start to conversate with other people on these issues, I want my audience, if it ever develops, to understand who I am and where I stand, okay? And I'm being real with you on all of this. So you have to pick a side, but it can get complicated. The Republicans and the conservatives. I'm going to go there because, a ton of you are going to say, yes, they're corrupt and they're broken and they're ugly, of course. But I'm going to show you there's two sides to this thing. There's the corrupt, crooked establishment, and I'm talking about inside the Conservative Party in Canada. I'm talking about the Republican Party in the United States. 100%, there is a corrupt, crooked, garbage influence that sits pretty heavy at the top of this thing. But at the same time, there are some willing partners in both of those organizations that can work with the grassroots to actually put forward real and positive change in our nation. So there's this guy, Thomas Sowell, down in the United States. I hope I'm saying his name right. He's a real smart dude. Google him up. He says a lot of awesome things on culture and politics. And he says politics and elections, I'm paraphrasing him, aren't about electing the right people. It's about getting the wrong people to do the right thing, okay? So just because you can look at a body and a group and say that's a corrupt body, that's a corrupt group, there's no reason to say I can't work through that. And when you're talking about spiritual matters, of course, you don't want to go to a church that's corrupt and crooked in any fashion. If all you can find is corrupt and messed up congregations around you, start a new one. And I'm not saying you're going to find one that's perfect, but I'm saying you want one that's aiming in the right direction at least. And sorry to say, that's hard to find. But the same is true. It's a little bit different when you step out of that into the political and cultural arena, because you're not just working with your core group anymore. You have to start partnering with other people that have different perspectives towards common goals. And so we can have a hardcore, I guess I could say, I'm a hardcore Christian, 100% believe the Bible, always going to stand on it. And I can be partnered with somebody that's a hardcore Muslim, for instance, or even atheist in some circumstances, I suppose. I guess once you get deeper, that might not be true, but there are those that claim to be, have atheists that I would agree with them on a bunch of political matters. And so you need to find common ground with a diverse group of people, not too diverse, but enough to where, and I'm talking about ideologically diverse, not racially. That means nothing, okay? Just because people look different, that don't mean zip, okay? It's about the character of a man. It's about his heart. It's about it's what he stands up for. That's where you can really see where people stand. I don't care what color you are, man. I care what you think in your heart, what you believe, what you say. I care how you move and where your heart's at. And God's the same way. So let's get over all this nonsense with, I want to see all the different colors represented. I mean, if one group is intentionally discarded because of their color, then that's garbage too. But I don't want somebody included or excluded or anything based on the color of their skin. It's all content of the heart. Anyway, so it gets complicated when I say you got to pick a side, because even after you pick a side, there's mini battles that have to go on within that. And so I guess at the end of the day, you have to have principles that you stand on, and you got to be willing to stand up for those in the public square. And you have to be willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with other people that are going to stand that wall with you, or that are going to hold that wall with you. And it's not always going to look like your best buddy standing next to you. But if you have a common goal and if you have some common ground, you're going to need those individuals to help hold that hill with you. And don't be angry or ignorant just because you're not going to agree on every little thing. Find that common ground and hold that hill. And the parental rights issue in Canada is a perfect example of where you see people of all different faiths and backgrounds coming together. I guess this main group that organized this march, called the Million Man March, was a group of Muslim-oriented individuals. Their beliefs are based in the Muslim faith, but they're saying, they're saying, stop indoctrinating our children. That, there are some wild things within their gender ideology. There are some wild ideas and some crazy practices being preached through this vessel, and we don't want our little children too heavily exposed to that, and we want to have a say in how those ideas are introduced to our children. This hands off our kids, I think, is what it was called. Google it up, man. You can find it there. Don't worry. And it's mainly Muslims, right, that are starting this thing. But guess what? As it begins to grow, you understand that it's not just Muslims that are having this crisis of conscience. There's Christians that come alongside them. There's people from the Jewish community that come alongside them. There's people from every sort of different background that you can think of. There's even people from, I guess what you call the gay community. They live lifestyles, gay lifestyle, whatever. They have partners, same-sex partners. But they're even coming out and they're standing together with this Hands Off Our Kids coalition, because they're saying, while we believe that these things are true, it's inappropriate to force them on young children, and parents always need to have an honored seat at the table. So you can see where, I would definitely disagree with somebody that has a Muslim faith on some theological issues. But at the end of that doesn't mean that I'm going to stand against them or hate them or fight them on other things, even on the spiritual issues. If we have a conversation, I hope it's mutually beneficial, that it's kind and respectful, and that we're building each other up either way. You know what I'm saying? And I have had those conversations with people of a Muslim faith and whatever other kind of faith. Like I said, I spent a ton of time with people from Toronto and London, and my local community was a First Nations community growing up. Racially, I'm a white guy, but where I come from is a First Nations community. I have a last name that I hold strong to, that is rooted and grounded in my First Nations community. And I feel, I want to be a strong part of that community regardless of my racial background. And I mean to do that. Anyways, just saying, I've had these conversations with individuals that see things from a different perspective, and it can be done in a kind and respectful way. And we need to move past the divisions that we have with one another, although they are real and those are good conversations. And when we stand into the cultural arena and we stand up into the political arena, we need to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder together against the corrupt authoritarians that are seeking to tear everything down around us. And I'm hoping that, there's enough Canadians, there's enough Americans, there's enough people in the Western world, especially, that can see this happening, this cultural shift, this breaking, this division that's becoming so popular around us, and how it's destroying the world that we were left with, and it's turning it into something uglier. If we look back, 500 years or whatever, a lot of us might have a different idea as to how things were built here in the West and whether it was good or bad. But I think we can all agree that as to where we stand now, we've had it pretty good. Growing up in the 90s was wonderful. I think it's definitely better than what kids are growing up with these days. And that's the wrong trajectory. We've had peace, we've had stability, we've had prosperity. And guess what, man? You look at history of human beings, those things are not that common all the time. So once we have them, we want to figure out how we got them, and we don't want to lose them. So those are the conversations that we need to be having with one another. And number one, you need to figure out, okay, we need to have these conversations kindly and respectfully with those we disagree with, because guess what? People are going to spit in your face. People are going to try to get physical. People are going to try to shut you up. People are going to try to shut you down. If you're willing to stand up for what's right, you're going to experience that 100% guaranteed. Christ said so himself, right? So how do we respond? We don't respond with the same garbage that's getting thrown at us, because then what are we? We've lost our whole hill. Our hill to stand on is goodness, righteousness, justice, and truth, and mercy, and all this good stuff that is, And if we lower ourselves to the level of those that are attacking us, we've lost everything. And the same thing goes on the liberty versus authoritarianism conversation. There's so many on the right. I guess the right is, as you would call it, I mean, people that believe in traditional and biblical values and perspectives. But there's so many on that side that are saying authoritarianism is the answer to the moral decay. And guess what? That's the same difference as putting on an Antifa mask and burning down your home village just to try to get back at them. Like, you're becoming the enemy to try to beat the enemy. And at the end of the day, you're all wearing ugly, nasty, dirty uniforms. And that's not the game I'm playing. That's not the game that Christ would play. That's not the game that any winners have played throughout history. If you're going to win, you've got to win right. Because if you sacrifice your values to get a temporary victory, you don't realize you've just handed the real battle over to your enemy. And of course, spiritually speaking, the battle has already been won. But as to what our generation and what our culture and what our countries, where they're going to take a stand, that history has not been written yet. And that choice belongs to us and the individuals that are surrounding us. And if you know some of these things to be true and you're sitting back quietly, I guess coward is a strong word, but it's accurate. I know there are real difficulties. I know there are real confrontations that come with being honest when you see righteousness, justice, and truth in your heart, not reflected back at you in the world around you. But if you just keep quiet, man, you're not helping the next guy. His battle's going to be twice as hard. And if you can stand up and just say your piece at least, little by little, you're helping that next guy to do the same thing. And guess what? The next guy for a lot of us is our children. So if we don't take this battle now, they're going to have to, and it's twice as hard for them. And God only knows when Christ returns. Yes, I believe in the Bible. Yes, I believe in the book of Revelations. Yes, I'm a Christian. Just like so many have throughout history that have stood upon this land and every other land. And it's not a white thing. That's miscommunication. That's messed up. That's not true. It was in Africa and everywhere else before the Europeans picked it up. So, don't believe what you read in the newspaper, or don't believe, the common story out there. Dig into it, find somebody that knows it and believes it around you, and have that heart-to-heart conversation with them before you make up your mind on these things. But at the end of the day, let me go ahead and give you a good recap on that all again. So my first episode was, there were some specific issues I addressed, but the main point of everything what I was saying is, let's speak respectfully and kindly to one another, even when we disagree, and we can build strong local communities that way. And I mean, this is a caveat to that, I guess. But something that's also true, and probably equally as true, if not more important, is that there is a battle going on and you have to pick a side. And once you realize that, you can start to figure out which side you want to be on. But I'm telling you right now, there is no middle ground. If you're sitting on the fence, you're on the losing side, you're on the wicked side, you're on the broken side. Figure out what the right side is. Put your heart into it. Put your conscience into it. Put your prayer into it. Seek and you shall find. This is Red Cap Conversations. This is Joshua Logan. Don't get mad about it. Let's just talk about it.
This is Red Cap Conversations.